The transit bay at Verath Station smelled like ammonia and burnt circuitry, which I was told was completely normal. The man who told me this was a processing technician named Orith, or that was the closest approximation my translator could manage, who had 4 arms and an extremely patient demeanor, and who had spent 20 minutes walking me through the bioscan protocols with the careful precision of someone who had processed a great many unusual animals and had simply decided that unusual was a category without useful limits. He'd reviewed Rex's documentation, logged Rex's physical parameters into the system, confirmed that Rex required no supplemental atmosphere, no temperature variance, and no dietary accommodation beyond what I was already carrying, and then handed me a blue transit chit with a symbol on it that he explained twice, indicated that the animal was cleared as non-biological threat, civilian handler, transit class only. That means he can be in the waiting areas, Orith said through the translator. Public concourse, gate bay, not the diplomatic secured zones, not the restricted corridors. Understood, I said. The animal must remain with the handler at all times. That won't be a problem, I said. Orith looked at Rex. Rex was sitting at my left knee, straight-backed, ears forward, amber eyes making a slow survey of the processing room with the professional thoroughness of an animal that is never entirely off duty. He looked at Orith. Orith looked at him. Orith had 4 eyes arranged in 2 pairs, the inner pair forward-facing and the outer pair positioned for lateral vision, and all 4 of them were focused on Rex, with an expression that the briefing materials had described as heightened attention in the Vethosi species, which was Orith's classification. The briefing materials had also noted that heightened attention in the Vethosi could mean anything from genuine alarm to intellectual fascination, and that distinguishing between the two was primarily a matter of context. In this context, Orith had been processing transit clearances for 6 hours and Rex was the 43rd animal he'd logged that shift, so I was fairly sure it was the latter. What classification is this animal? Orith said. Belgian Malinois, I said. Working dog, retired. Working classification. K9, I said. Patrol and detection, Federal Service. Orith looked at this. He looked at Rex again. Rex had stopped his survey and was now looking at Orith with the calm, sustained attention he brought to everything. Orith said, "It is calm." "He's always calm," I said. Orith made a notation. He handed me the blue chit and the documentation packet and said, "Base 7. Your gate assignment will be on the board." He paused, and then said something further that the translator took a moment to render and gave me as, "The animal, your K9, does it require exercise space during the transit wait?" "He's fine," I said. "He'll sleep." "They do that," Orith said, "sleep in public areas." "He does," I said. "He picks a spot he likes and sleeps until there's something worth paying attention to." Orith made another notation. I wasn't sure what he was noting, but he seemed thorough. Base 7 was a 40-minute walk from processing, not counting the 2 wrong turns I made because the wayfinding system had a translation lag and I missed a junction. Rex walked at my left knee the whole way, perfectly matched to my pace, his nails making a faint, even click on the composite flooring. Other travelers gave us a wide path, not a frightened wide path, more the automatic adjustment you make when there's a purposeful animal in the corridor, the same clearance you'd give a working dog at an airport back home. Some of them stared, most didn't. We were 40 minutes out of the main docking cluster, and the transit corridors were getting progressively less busy and progressively more industrial in character, the decorative fixtures giving way to functional piping and junction boxes and conduit runs along the ceiling. Bay 7 itself opened out into a proper transit waiting area. High ceiling, 20-meter span, departure board on the far wall, rows of composite seating in the pale gray material that I would later learn was standard station issue, and was in fact comfortable for approximately 6 species, none of them human. There were perhaps 40 travelers distributed across the seating, most of them in the loose clusters that form when people traveling together choose adjacent seats and then establish a small territorial boundary around their group. The departure board was scrolling in 17 scripts. The air had the particular flat quality of recycled atmosphere that you develop a tolerance for, and the ammonia undertone that I had been told was normal. I found 2 seats near the middle left of the bay, which was neither the wall nor the center, and gave a reasonable line of sight to both doors. This is the kind of seating preference you develop in corrections work, and it stops being a conscious choice after a few years. Rex turned twice in the space in front of the seats and then lay down. He put his chin on my left boot. I got out my book. I should tell you about Rex before I tell you about the rest of it, because the rest of it doesn't make sense without him, and he doesn't make sense without some history. Rex came to me through the Federal K-9 Unit 7 disbandment, which happened in the spring 6 years ago, when a budget realignment eliminated 3 detection units and put 14 working dogs into the rehoming pipeline. I heard about it from a colleague who had worked with federal law enforcement before moving into corrections administration, who called me on a Tuesday and said, "Harlan, there are some exceptional dogs about to end up in shelters, and I know you've been thinking about a dog since you retired." I hadn't told him I'd been thinking about a dog. I had apparently been broadcasting it without knowing. The shelter that took the Unit 7 dogs was a rescue in Marietta called Second Watch, run by a woman named Barbara Kessler, who had formerly worked with the county animal services and had a specific focus on retired working animals. She called the dogs that came to her professionals in transition, which was a phrase I found both accurate and touching. She sent me a profile sheet on 3 dogs that she thought matched what my colleague had described about me, and one of them was Rex. The profile said, Belgian Malinois, male, approximately 4 years old at intake, certified patrol and narcotics detection, 7 years federal service, retired due to unit disbandment, no behavioral issues, highest assessment scores in Unit 7, available for experienced handlers only. I drove to Marietta on a Saturday morning. Barbara took me back to the kennel area and showed me 3 dogs. The first 2 were fine animals who looked at me with the alert, professional gaze of dogs that are very good at their jobs and are waiting to see if I was going to be worth their time. The third one was Rex. Rex was in the last run on the left. He was sitting in the middle of the run, not pacing, not at the gate, not doing anything in particular, sitting in that straight-backed, upright way he would sit for the rest of his life, doing the slow ear rotation, watching the kennel entrance. When I came around the corner and he saw me, he stood up. Not urgently. He just went from sitting to standing in one clean motion and looked at me. Barbara said, he's evaluating you. He does this, just let him. I stood at the run gate and let him evaluate me. He walked to the gate. He put his nose to the mesh and took one long, thorough breath. Then he sat back down. Then he looked at me for approximately 90 seconds with those amber eyes, which I would come to learn were the most honest eyes I had ever looked into. And I have known a fair number of people in my life and some very good dogs, and I stand by that assessment. He looked at me. I looked at him. Then he lay down, put his chin on his front paws, and kept looking at me. Barbara said, "That's as close to an endorsement as I've ever seen him give." I said, "Can I come in?" She said yes. I went in. He stood up when I came through the gate. I crouched down, which the left knee was already complaining about in those days, and I put my hand out, palm up, and he walked over and put his chin in my hand. Not his nose, his chin, the whole weight of his head just resting there. I said, "All right." That was the whole conversation. It covered everything. I tell you this because I want you to understand that what happened in Bay 7 at Verath Station was not an accident or a surprise. It was Rex doing what Rex had always done, in whatever room he found himself, which was to assess the situation with the tools he'd been given: 7 years of federal training, 9 years of living in the world, and whatever it is that Belgian Malinois have that is not quite intelligence and not quite instinct, but sits somewhere between the two and functions better than either. And then do the obvious thing. The obvious thing that day happened to be sitting down in the middle of an alien transit bay at the exact moment when the mathematics of the room were about to produce a result nobody wanted. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Kethevry diplomatic delegation arrived in Bay 7 approximately 20 minutes after Rex and I did. They came through the east entrance in a tight group, 8 individuals in the formal burgundy and gold robes of mid-level governmental service, not the senior hierarchy, but not junior staff either. The robes were heavy silk equivalent with an embroidered hem that the briefing materials had told me indicated active diplomatic mandate rather than advisory status, which was a distinction that mattered in Kethevry protocol. They had a security detail of 2, tall, plain-garmented, armor-rated by the texture of the material, both carrying sidearms in closed diagonal chest holsters of a design I recognized from the transit security briefing as a compressed gas ranged weapon, with a stun and incapacitate primary function. The 2 security officers positioned themselves at the mouth of the delegation's cluster with the practiced, economical placement of people who know exactly what they're doing. I noted all of this without making it obvious that I was noting it, which is a skill that transfers well from corrections work to every subsequent environment. The Kethevry were tall, 2 meters and change, plantigrade, with the secondary forelimb joint that gave the arm a folded appearance at rest. Their skin ran deep mottled green that I'd been briefed shifted toward brown under stress, though the delegation members were showing none of that, which indicated either genuine composure or professional concealment. Their faces were broad and flat with 4 eyes in a horizontal band, the inner pair forward-focused, the outer pair mobile and largely independent, able to track separate subjects simultaneously. They communicated a great deal with those outer eyes. Once you knew what to look for, the outer eye movement was as legible as a face. The delegation settled into the far right corner of the bay. Their security officers maintained position. One of the delegation members, a compact, precise-looking individual who turned out to be the administrative secretary, began setting up a portable data system on the armrest of his seat with the focused efficiency of someone who does not consider waiting time to be unproductive. I went back to my book. Rex was asleep on my boot. I had been traveling with Rex for 3 weeks at this point and had developed a reliable picture of what he found interesting in transit environments and what he did not. Spaceport security screening, moderately interesting, primarily because the equipment was novel and he wanted to assess it. In transit holding bays, low interest. Customs and biological processing, moderately interesting, again because of the equipment. Transit waiting areas, low interest after the initial survey, which he would complete within about 10 minutes of arrival, and then decline to repeat unless something changed. Nothing had changed in Bay 7, as far as Rex was concerned, for the 40 minutes since we'd arrived. He'd done his survey, filed his findings under acceptable, and gone to sleep. This is the behavior of a working dog with 19 years of training and experience between federal service and the 6 years since, not a lack of alertness, but the precise calibration of alertness that expends no resources on what isn't there and reserves everything for what is. I was on page 81 of A History of the American West, which was a good book, and which I had bought in the Atlanta airport the day before departure specifically, because I had anticipated significant amounts of waiting time and had been correct. The diplomatic aide was 3 rows in front of me. She had arrived shortly before the Kethevry delegation and had been reading documents on a tablet since she sat down. She had the State Department attachment insignia on her jacket shoulder. Her documents had headers I could partially read from my angle, including one that said contested transit corridor, current status, which told me she was working the same set of issues that had apparently produced the Kethavri delegation's presence in this particular bay on this particular day. I want to be clear about what the contested corridor dispute was, to the extent that I understood it, because it provides context for what came next. The 7th approach corridor, the transit lane that connected 3 mid-tier systems to the Verath hub, had been a matter of active dispute for roughly 18 months. Humanity had navigated the corridor under a provisional access agreement that both sides had signed, but that the Kethavri coalition faction, a political grouping that opposed the broader engagement with humanity on principled grounds, considered to have been extracted under diplomatic pressure rather than freely negotiated. The coalition faction's position was that the agreement was invalid, that transit through the corridor by human-flagged vessels constituted occupation rather than navigation, and that the Kethavri government's willingness to honor the agreement was a capitulation to commercial interests over strategic sovereignty. I knew this from the briefing materials, which had been thorough. I also knew that the coalition faction had staged 3 previous demonstrations in the preceding 6 months, 2 at Kethavri governmental facilities, and 1 at a joint trade exhibition, all nonviolent, all designed to put their position on official record. The demonstrations had been coordinated, professionally executed, and notably free of the kind of excess that tends to turn a political demonstration into something categorically different. I had thought when I read all of this that they sounded like people with a grievance who had decided to pursue it through the available means short of actual conflict, and that this was a better situation than the alternative. I still think that. I am saying it now because I want to be accurate about what happened in Bay 7, and accuracy requires acknowledging that the people who walked through the east doors were pursuing a political goal, not committing an act of random aggression. The 9 Kethavri came through the east doors at 11:42 station time. I was on page 81. I noticed them the way I noticed the Kethavri delegation, the way I noticed everything in a room, which is to say peripherally, continuously, without making it the center of my attention. They came through in a tight-spaced formation of 9, wearing plain gray-black utility garments with no insignia and moving in the particular coordinated pattern of people executing a plan. The pattern has a specific geometry, roughly equal spacing, facing distributed across the room's width rather than oriented toward a single point, movement that is calm but deliberate rather than purposeless. You learn to read that pattern. In corrections work, you see it before incidents. It is not an aggressive posture in isolation. It's a coordinated one, and the difference matters. They spread into the room within about 6 seconds of entry. The 2 Kethavri security officers were on their feet before the 9 had fully fanned out. The diplomatic aide had stopped reading her documents. The lead figure was a male Kethavri, perhaps a centimeter taller than average for his species, wearing a utility vest over his base layer. The profile under the right panel of the vest was specific, flat rectangular, positioned for a forward draw weight distribution consistent with a compact ranged weapon. I clocked it and classified it and did not react to it, because reacting to it in that moment would have been a choice with consequences I hadn't yet evaluated. He spoke loudly. The translator on my wrist, a slim band with a bone conduction speaker that the State Department had provided, gave me a half-second lag and then, "No one leaves. This is a message. The corridor belongs to the coalition, not the treaty. Anyone who stands is a statement." The room had gone still. That particular stillness has a texture you learn to recognize. It's not silence. The environmental systems kept cycling. The departure board kept scrolling. But the layer of human-equivalent sound, the ambient social noise of a waiting area, dropped out completely. Everyone in that room had just updated their understanding of what kind of situation they were in. Rex lifted his chin off my boot. He was sitting upright, within about 2 seconds of the east doors opening. By the time I registered the formation, Rex had already completed whatever assessment his particular process involves and arrived at a conclusion, because he was sitting with his spine straight and his ears fully forward and his amber eyes on the lead figure, with the focused, economical attention of a dog that has decided something is worth paying attention to. I put my book down on the seat next to me, page 81. I did not lose my place. The lead figure continued. The translator gave me segments. The transit authorization for Corridor 79 is a document signed under duress and will not be honored. We are here to deliver that message to the delegation and to anyone traveling under treaty authority. A pause. There are no hostiles. There are no weapons. The second part was a lie. The weapons profile under his right panel hadn't changed. One of the 9 in the spread, a younger male at the left side position, had a similar profile. The others I couldn't read clearly at my angle. The first part, there are no hostiles, I was inclined to take at face value, in the sense that their stated intent was message delivery, not engagement. A group intending actual violence does not typically announce no weapons when they have them. They either don't mention weapons or they display them. The announcement was designed to manage the room's response. It was a calculated statement by people who had thought about what they wanted the room to do. The security officers were calculating angles. I could see the weight shift in the taller one's stance. A slow, incremental rotation toward a draw position that he was restraining, consciously, because he was professional, and he could see that the 9 were spread enough to make a draw a problem. The shorter officer had his right hand not on his holster but very close to his holster, resting against his side in the way that is not technically a gun hand position, but is functionally adjacent to it. This is the mathematics I mentioned earlier. 2 security officers who are each calculating whether they have to act before the other side acts. 9 opposition members who are calculating the same in the other direction. A room full of civilians in the middle. And the very specific threshold at which everyone acts simultaneously, which looks different from everyone acting intentionally, but produces the same result. I had seen that threshold crossed twice in 19 years of corrections. Neither time ended the way anyone intended. Rex stood up. He did not make a sound. He went from sitting to standing in one clean movement, stretched his front legs forward and his hindquarters back in the single long decompressing bow of a dog transitioning from rest, and then he was standing. 31 kilograms, black nylon vest, brass buckles, faded patches, amber eyes on the lead figure. I stood up with him. I put my hand lightly on the handle of his vest, not gripping it, not restraining him, just the touch that means I'm here and we're together, which was the only communication we needed after 6 years. I said, easy. One word quietly. Rex walked forward. I have tried to describe this to several people in the years since, and I have never entirely gotten it right. The closest I can come is this. Rex walking through a room with a purpose looks different from Rex walking through a room without one, and both of them look different from the way most things move when they are trying to make something happen. He doesn't announce. He doesn't perform. He moves at a steady, unhurried pace that carries a quality of inevitability, not aggression, not threat, but the particular quality of motion that belongs to something that has already decided where it's going and has no particular interest in being redirected. The space in front of him became available. Not because anything was pushed, but because something in the architecture of his movement communicated that the space was already spoken for, and every conscious being in that room processed that communication faster than they could articulate it. We walked down the central aisle of Bay 7, the composite chairs on either side, the travelers who had frozen, watching, the departure board scrolling with total indifference to events below it. The 9 Kethavri distributed across the bay's middle section, between the travelers and the diplomatic delegation's corner. Rex walked toward them with his ears forward and his eyes on the lead figure. The lead figure stopped talking. I clocked the moment. The translator went silent mid-sentence, which meant the output had stopped because the input had stopped. The lead figure had been speaking, and then he wasn't speaking. He was watching Rex. Rex stopped approximately 2 meters from him. He sat down. This sounds like a small thing. I understand that it sounds like a small thing. But I have to tell you what Rex sitting down in that room looked like. Because it was not a small thing to anyone present, including the four-eyed Kethavri coalition member, who had just been in the middle of delivering a formal political ultimatum to a diplomatic delegation. Rex sat the way he always sat, haunches even, front legs straight, spine upright, head level. His tail was not wagging. This is relevant. Rex's tail wag is a specific communication with specific meanings, and this was not a tail wag situation, and Rex knew the difference. He was not showing anything that a reasonable observer would call aggression or threat display. He was sitting. But he was sitting the way a loaded weapon sits on a table, not doing anything, not threatening anything, simply present in a way that communicates a complete and unhurried readiness for whatever the situation requires. His amber eyes were on the lead figure's face, not moving, not blinking more than animals blink, just there. I stopped at Rex's left flank. I put my hands in my jacket pockets. I was wearing cargo pants and a jacket that had lost its original color through repeated washing, and I had reading glasses on because I had been holding my book 30 seconds ago and hadn't thought to take them off. I am 63 years old and 5 feet 10 and 185 pounds, and the most threatening thing about my appearance in that moment was probably the expression of a person who has been mildly annoyed by transit seating for 40 minutes and has now decided to say something about it. I was not trying to look threatening. It would not have improved anything. One of the 9, the younger male at the left side position, said something. The translator gave me, "What is that thing?" I said, "That's my dog." The lead figure said something. The translator gave me, "That is an animal, a domestic animal." "That's right," I said. "It is not a threat." I thought about that for a moment. The obvious answer was that Rex was a highly trained federal K-9 with a 9-year operational and personal history that had produced in him a set of capabilities that the alien threat classification system apparently couldn't accurately file. But I didn't say the obvious answer, because the obvious answer was a challenge, and I wasn't there to challenge anyone. I said, "He's retired." The translator took a beat on "retired" and then apparently found an approximation, because the lead figure's reaction indicated he'd understood. He looked from Rex to me and then back to Rex. Rex had not moved. His ears were forward, his eyes were on the lead figure, his tail was still. The taller security officer, the one with the better draw angle, had stopped the incremental weight shift I'd been tracking. He was watching Rex. I said, "I want to say something." The translator rendered it. The lead figure did not respond, which I took as permission. "I've been in rooms like this one," I said. "The shape is familiar. You have a message you want the delegation to hear, you want witnesses, and you brought enough of a presence to make sure nobody interrupts before you finish. I understand that, and I can see that you're not here to start something. If you were, it would already be started." I paused. "But there are 2 officers in this room who are calculating an angle. When officers calculate angles, the math gets away from the room fast. The message you wanted to deliver gets buried under whatever happens next. That outcome doesn't serve your position." The lead figure was quiet. His 4 eyes were on me, both outer ones tracking at center, the undivided attention configuration. The 9 had not moved. "Rex is sitting there," I said, "because that's what he does when there's something in a room that might need attending to. He's not going to do anything you don't make necessary. I'm not going to do anything. I'm a retired corrections officer from Georgia with a bad knee and a book. I have no authority here, no weapon, and no official role except that I was standing in the middle of this bay when you walked in." I looked at the lead figure. but he's between you and the door, and I'd rather have a conversation." The room was very quiet. Rex had not moved. His ears did the slow monitoring rotation, one complete turn, attending, and then settling forward again. His eyes did not leave the lead figure's face. The younger male at the left side position said something further. The translator gave me, "We have seen Earth animals. They are small and domestic. They are," a word it flagged as uncertain, offering companions with a secondary note that the original might carry the additional meaning of decorative or ceremonial. "He worked Federal K-9 for 7 years, I said. "Patrol and narcotics detection. Before that he did 2 years with county law enforcement. He's been certified to a threat response standard that I was told, during our processing for this transit, doesn't have a direct equivalent in the Kethavri classification system, because the nearest category you have is for something considerably larger." I said this the way I said most things, even unhurried, without raising my voice. Raising your voice in a tense room is an action with consequences, and I've never found it improves things. Rex had not moved. The lead figure looked at Rex for a long time, all 4 eyes, both outer ones at center. He was very still. Then he said something. The translator gave me, "Your animal has not moved." "No," I said. "Since it sat, it has not moved." "No. What does it require to move?" "He'll make that decision," I said. "He's better at it than I am." The lead figure was quiet again. His skin color, I noticed, had shifted very slightly. The deep mottled green had taken on an undertone that might have been the brown the briefing materials associated with stress, or might have been the lighting. He looked at Rex. Rex looked at him. One of the 9 toward the back of the spread said something quickly to the lead figure. The translator caught part of it, "Should we?" and then a word it couldn't confidently render, offering reconfigure or reassess the geometry of the position. The lead figure didn't answer immediately. He said, quietly, something that the translator gave me as, "It is assessing us." "Yes," I said. "It has been assessing us since we entered." "Since before you entered," I said. He heard the door. The lead figure absorbed that. His outer eyes shifted, a movement I'd learned to read as the Kethavri equivalent of recalculating something. He looked at Rex, and then at me, and then at Rex again. "You were reading," he said. "When we came in, you were reading a physical document." "A book," I said. "History of the American West." "You put it down." "Yes." "The animal stood first." "Yes." He looked at Rex again. Rex's ear did the slow rotation, one half turn attending to something in the middle distance. Then it settled forward. His eyes had never left the lead figure. The lead figure said, to no one in particular, something that the translator rendered as, "It was aware before he was." "He's always aware," I said. "He just picks what to do about it." The lead figure was quiet for what felt like a long time but was probably 30 seconds. The room held its stillness. The departure board scrolled. The environmental system cycled. Then he said something to the 9. I caught fragments: posture, withdrawn, message delivered, witnesses present. The 9 shifted. The tight-spaced geometry of their formation loosened, went from fist to open hand. They hadn't left. They were still present, but the particular weight of coordinated readiness had left the room. The taller security officer took a slow, audible breath. The shorter one moved his hand away from his holster. The lead figure looked at me. He said, "We have delivered our message. The witnesses are present. The corridor dispute is on the official record of this station's security logs from the moment we entered." "Understood," I said. "The message is delivered." "I heard it," I said. "So did everyone in this room." He looked at Rex one more time. Rex was still sitting in his straight-backed posture, still looking at the lead figure, still not moving, still carrying that quality of calm readiness that I had stopped trying to explain to people and had simply started treating as a feature of the universe, like gravity. Then Rex's tail moved one slow sweep, not a wag, a single arc of acknowledgement or something like it. The lead figure watched the tail. He said something quiet. The translator gave me, "That is," and then a flag saying it couldn't render the word confidently with 3 candidate meanings: purposeful, intentional, and communicating. I said, "He knows you're leaving." The lead figure looked at me. Then he said, in what I took for the first time since he'd come through the east doors to be something like a conversational register rather than a formal statement register, "The animal told you this." "He tells me most things," I said. "I've gotten better at reading him over the years." The lead figure was quiet. Something in his posture had changed since he'd come through the east doors, not visibly to most observers, but I've spent 2 decades watching bodies in confined spaces under stress, and I can read the small shifts. The formal readiness of someone delivering a prepared statement had loosened by some small degree into the posture of a person, standing in front of something he hadn't planned for and was taking his time with. He said, "In our culture, when an animal places itself before an armed party, there are 2 interpretations: a provocation or a sacrifice." "Rex isn't either," I said. "What is it?" "He's making himself available," I said. "If you want to start something, you go through him first, and he's making it easy to see that clearly. He's not escalating. He's not threatening. He's present, waiting to see what kind of situation this turns out to be." The lead figure absorbed that, he said, "and if we had moved, he would have made a decision. I couldn't tell you in advance what decision, because it would have been based on what you did and how you did it, and he'd have calibrated to that in real time. That's how he works." The lead figure looked at Rex. Rex was still sitting, still looking, still carrying that quality of steady, attending patience that had nothing performative in it and everything final. "We were told," the lead figure said slowly, "that Earth animals are companions, domestic, that humans carry them for comfort and social habit." "Some people do," I said. "Rex has never been that kind of dog." He was quiet for a moment. "Then you trust it." "With my life," I said, "have for 6 years." He said, "For a domestic companion, that is a significant statement." "He's a significant animal," I said. The 9 left through the east doors. They left in the same ordered fashion they'd arrived, no running, no urgency, the deliberate calm of a coordinated exit. The lead figure was last through the door. He looked back once at Rex. Rex watched him go. His tail made 2 complete slow arcs. Then he turned around and looked up at me and put his chin on my left hand, which I had at some point taken out of my jacket pocket without noticing. I scratched his ears. The taller security officer came over. He was younger than I'd initially assessed, perhaps early 30s in Kethavri terms, which corresponded roughly to the same in human terms based on what the briefing materials said about developmental equivalency. He looked at Rex, then at me. He said, "You are not a negotiator." "No," I said. "Not security." "No." "What are you?" "I'm the person who was in the middle of the room," I said. He looked at Rex again with the careful, recalibrating expression of someone updating a model they'd had significant confidence in. "It did not threaten," he said. "It sat down." "That's right." "And they withdrew." "They delivered their message," I said, "which is what they came to do. Rex gave them a place to stop at the message." He watched Rex for a moment. Rex's ear did the slow monitoring rotation. The officer watched the ear the way professionals watch things that don't behave the way they're supposed to. He said, "What is its decision system?" The translator flagged this as a likely imperfect rendering of a word that might more precisely mean the method by which it determines when intervention is required. Experience and temperament, I said. He's been doing this a long time. It is not aggressive. He doesn't need to be, I said. That's not the same thing as unable to be. The officer was quiet for a moment. Then, when did it decide to intervene? When they came through the door, I said. Probably before if he heard them in the corridor. He'd been asleep. He woke up, listened, and stood up. That was his assessment. Everything after that was just giving the assessment room to be accurate. The officer looked at Rex for a long time. Rex had not moved from his sitting position on the floor of Bay 7. He was looking at nothing in particular now, not the door, not me, not the officer. He had gone into the soft, attending resting state he defaulted to when the primary concern had resolved and the situation was returning to baseline. His ears did the slow rotation. The officer said, "The animal was between us and the door." "Yes." "It chose that position." "Yes." Without a command. I thought about Rex standing up from my boot and walking forward and sitting down in that precise location on the floor of Transit Bay 7, and the quality of decision-making that had produced that choice, and the 9 years of accumulated experience and training that lived behind it. "He knows his job," I said. The officer made a sound that might have been acknowledgement and said, "I will file a report on this incident. The record will note a long compound word that the translator broke into non-hostile behavioral deterrence via an Earth-native working classification companion animal. Is that characterization accurate?" "That's accurate," I said. He looked at Rex one more time. Then he said something that the translator had to work on for a moment before giving me. "We are trained, our service, Kethevry Protective Service, we are trained in what to do when an armed party enters a transit bay. There are protocols. The protocols account for armed parties, for numbers, for weapon types and positions, for the geometry of the room." He paused. "The protocols do not account for this." "What do they account for that's closest?" I said. He thought about that. There is a category in the protocol index for, the translator rendered it as, unexpected environmental variable that alters the calculation. It is primarily written for things like structural failures, atmosphere compromises, unexpected civilian medical events, things that change what is possible in a room without being one of the parties. He looked at Rex. "I believe that is the most accurate filing category." "That seems right," I said. "The animal is an unexpected environmental variable." "He's been that his whole career," I said. "It's a talent." The officer looked at me with the expression of someone who has decided that the human in front of him is either very wise or very strange, and has not yet determined which. He said, "Do all Earth K9 animals do this?" "All well-trained ones have some version of it," I said. "Rex has more of it than most. Something to do with his particular temperament and the specific work he did for the specific number of years he did it." "What work specifically?" "Patrol and narcotics detection, primarily. But the last 3 years of his service, he was assigned to a special operations support unit that was never officially named in any documentation I received, which tells me it involved things that were sensitive in some way. Barbara, the woman who placed him with me, said the unit had been based out of a federal facility in Virginia and had done work in 3 countries. She said it tactfully, which told me the tact was deliberate. The officer was very still. "He has operational history." "He has operational history," I said. "And he is retired." "He is retired," I said. "He gets cheese with his medication in the morning, and he has a spot on the back porch he's identified as particularly good. That's his current operational assignment." The officer looked at Rex with an expression I was coming to recognize as the Kethevry version of a long pause. Rex was in his settled resting state, ears doing the slow rotation, chin on my boot, tail still. "I will note the operational history in the report," the officer said. "You can," I said. The documentation is on file with the State Department Transit Office. He said, "One more question." "Go ahead." "When it sat down in the position between us and the door, did it know what it was doing? In the way you mean when you say no. Did it understand the situation?" I thought about that for a moment. It's a fair question, and it's a harder question than it sounds, and I've had 6 years to think about it, and I haven't arrived at a final answer. What I said was this: I don't know what Rex understands in the way I understand things. I know he assesses accurately. I know his assessment of that situation was correct, and mine was slower. I know that when I stood up and said, "Easy," I wasn't giving him permission to act. I was telling him I was coming with him, because he'd already decided to go. Whether that's knowing in your sense, I think that depends on whether the result is what matters or the process is. The officer considered this. "In our service," he said, "we value the process. Understanding why a decision was made is how you replicate the decision." "In corrections work," I said, "we valued the result. Understanding why was for the report." He looked at Rex again. Rex's ear rotated. The officer watched it. He said very quietly, "It heard the door." "Before I registered movement," I said, "Yes." He nodded. The motion carried over from the briefing materials as a Kethavri acknowledgement gesture. He said, "I will file a thorough report." "Good," I said. He walked back to the delegation's corner. I walked back to my seat. Rex walked with me, fell into his position at my left knee, turned twice, lay down, and put his chin on my left boot. I picked up my book, page 81. The departure board updated. Base 7, Gate Charlie, boarding in 45 minutes. The environmental system cycled its ammonia and circuitry routine. The room settled back into the flat, unhurried rhythm of a waiting area in which the most immediately pressing concern was whether the gate assignment would hold or whether there would be a delay. The 40-odd travelers in Bay 7 were doing what travelers do after a tense situation passes. They were pretending to return to their previous activities while actually spending considerable cognitive effort processing what had just happened. Some of them had taken out devices. Some of them were looking at each other. Two of them, a pair of scaled individuals I hadn't been able to place by species in the briefing materials, were engaged in a quiet conversation with the focused intensity of people exchanging detailed observations. The diplomatic aide had gone back to her tablet, though she was reading it with considerably less of her attention than before. The Kethavri security officers were standing at their posts with the particular controlled stillness of professionals who have just had their threat model updated and are incorporating the new data. I read for roughly 20 minutes before she came and sat in the empty chair 3 down from mine. She was mid-40s, a practical face, dark hair with the first gray showing at the temple, the jacket with the State Department insignia on the shoulder, and the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent significant professional time in rooms where things were about to go badly wrong, and have developed a calm relationship with that circumstance. She looked at Rex. Rex looked at her. His tail made a single slow arc. She said, "I want to note for my own records that I have been in transit escalation situations involving parties with implied weapons on 4 occasions in 6 years of service." "Okay," I said. "This is the first time it was resolved by a dog." "I wouldn't say Rex resolved it," I said. "He gave them a place to stop." She considered that. "He sat in the middle of the floor." "That's right." "Between an armed demonstration and a diplomatic security detail." "Between people who were calculating each other," I said. "He interrupted the calculation." She looked at Rex for a moment. Rex was in his settled resting state, ears doing the slow rotation, chin on my boot. "He interrupted it by sitting down," she said. "By sitting down in the right place," I said, "in a way that carried the particular quality of attention that communicates that the calculation has already been completed and the result is known." She wrote something in her notebook. She had a physical notebook, which I respected. "What's his name?" she said. "Rex." "Has he done this before?" "Not in an alien transit bay," I said, but the situation wasn't new to him. She looked at him again. "What kind of dog is he?" "Belgian Malinois, working K9, retired, 7 years federal service." "He doesn't look like what I was expecting when someone said dog this morning." "He looks exactly like what he is," I said, "which is part of it." She made another note. She said, "The delegation is filing a formal account of the incident. I'll be attaching a civilian observer supplemental. Is there anything you want included or excluded?" "Just what happened," I said. "Which was?" I looked at Rex. His eyes were soft-closed now, the deep amber gone to the warm amber of an animal that has returned to baseline and found the baseline satisfactory. His chin was on my boot. His ears were doing the slow, unconscious rotation of a working dog that doesn't fully disengage even in sleep. "A retired federal K9, I said, "sat down in the right place. That's all." She wrote it down. She stood up, straightened her jacket, nodded once, nodded at me, at Rex, and walked back toward the delegation's corner. I turned to page 82. We boarded at 11:45, 15 minutes ahead of schedule. The gate agent of Ethosi, like Orith from processing, though younger and with a different sub-pattern to the lateral eye arrangement, checked my documents, checked Rex's blue transit chit, and then looked at Rex for a long moment before waving us through. He didn't say anything. Some things don't need saying. The transit itself took 11 hours. Rex slept for 8 of them with his head on my thigh, which the transit pod seating had not been designed for, and which I accommodated by adopting a position that was not optimal for my lower back, but that I had stopped considering negotiable approximately 6 years ago. I slept for 4 hours. I finished the book about the American West somewhere over what the transit display told me was the second waypoint, which I found satisfying. I don't know what the eventual diplomatic outcome of the Verath corridor dispute was. I was an observer, not a participant, and my access to formal proceedings was limited to briefings and open session summaries. I know that there were meetings, and that the meetings produced documents, and that the documents required further meetings, which is the standard mechanism by which these things proceed. 3 months after I got home to Marietta, I received a formal communication from the State Department thanking me for my service during the incident and describing my contribution as stabilizing in a situation with escalation potential. I have the letter in a drawer somewhere. I've read it once. What I know specifically is this. The taller security officer, whose name I learned later from a diplomatic courtesy communication, was Assessor Second Vithran Kale, which my nephew informed me was approximately equivalent in rank to a senior sergeant in a human protective service, filed a formal information request through the Kethavri governmental channels to the Earth Diplomatic Liaison Office. The request asked for documentation on the Earth K9 working classification, training protocols, certification standards, and the physiological and cognitive basis for what the filing described, in translation, as the animal's demonstrated capacity for independent threat environment assessment and behavioral intervention without handler direction. The request included a secondary note that was not standard in formal information requests, which said, "The assessor acknowledges that this request is unusual in its specificity. The request is generated by direct observation of a single event, and the assessor does not feel that existing classification frameworks adequately account for what was observed. The Earth Liaison is asked to provide whatever context is necessary to correctly categorize this capability." I know this because the State Department forwarded me the request and asked if I would be willing to respond, given that I had the most directly relevant experience. I said yes. I wrote a 4-page document. I described how Belgian Malinois are bred, what their working lineage is, and why they are both one of the most widely used working K9 breeds in federal and military service, and also genuinely one of the better suited dogs to be someone's companion, if the someone has the right temperament and the right background. I described the K9 federal certification process in as much detail as I thought was useful. I described Rex's 7-year service record, as I understood it from the documentation Barbara Kessler had given me at intake. I described the vet clinic's assessment of his temperament, which I quoted at length because I thought it was accurate, and because it covered things that are difficult to explain in abstract terms, but are very clear when stated precisely. That his temperament was not trained into him on top of a different underlying nature, but that his training had been built on and with a nature that was already there, and that the two were now indistinguishable. Then I wrote a section about what Rex does in rooms, which I knew would be the section they actually needed, and which was the hardest to write because it required me to describe something I had observed for 6 years without ever having tried to put into words. I said, he assesses, continuously, thoroughly, and with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing something for long enough that it stops requiring active effort and becomes the background against which everything else happens. He is never not assessing. He is never not attending. What looks like sleep is a kind of attended rest in which the monitoring continues at a lower threshold, so that when something crosses that threshold, he is not waking up from sleep, but simply reallocating attention that was already running. He processes the information he gathers and he acts on what he processes, and the acting is characterized by economy. He does the minimum necessary thing at the minimum necessary moment, because more than that has always been unnecessary. He doesn't perform. He doesn't announce. He doesn't escalate to impress anyone. He simply does the obvious thing, and the obvious thing is usually right. And being right consistently across 9 years of varied situations produces a kind of authority that has nothing to do with size or aggression or any of the things we typically associate with authority. It has to do with being correct. I also included a photograph. Rex on the back porch in the late afternoon light, ears doing the slow rotation, amber eyes on the tree line. I sent the document to the liaison office and didn't think much more about it. Rex is 11 now. His hips are managed with a medication that the vet sources through a specialist in Atlanta, and which Rex takes in a piece of cheese every morning without complaint, because Rex has always had a sensible relationship with medication. His muzzle has gone gray. The amber eyes haven't changed. He still sleeps with his chin on my left boot when he's satisfied with a location, and he's still assessing continuously, and the assessment is still right, though the situations he applies it to these days are primarily the back porch tree line, the front yard, the road past the mailbox, and the occasional neighbor's dog who comes by and requires evaluation. He has a specific position on the back porch in the late afternoon when the light comes through the pine trees at a certain angle. He has identified this as a good place to be, and he spends considerable time there. I can see it from the kitchen window, and sometimes I stand at the window with a cup of coffee and watch him sitting there doing the ear rotation in the light. I kept his old vest, the one from Federal Service, with the faded patches and the brass buckles and the panel that says Rex, Federal K9 Unit 7. I kept it when I got him his new one last year, which is identical except that the patches aren't faded and the buckles are bright. The old one is on a hook near the back door. I don't have a particular reason for keeping it there. It just seems like the right place for it. My nephew called in the spring following Verath Station. He wanted to know if I'd be available for a second rotation on the cultural exchange program. I said it depended on whether Rex could be cleared for the transit, given that he was 2 years older than the first time. My nephew said he'd look into it. He called back 2 weeks later. He said Rex was cleared, and that there had been a formal diplomatic request, submitted through the proper channels, official language, the whole procedure, from the Kethavri Government Security Directorate. The request specified that the second cultural exchange rotation from the civilian observer pool should, if at all possible, include the handler of the Earth K-9 designated Rex, Federal Unit 7, currently resident in Marietta, Georgia, provided the handler was willing and the animal was medically fit for transit. My nephew read me this slowly, with the particular care of someone delivering a sentence they find genuinely amusing. I said, "What exactly are they requesting?" My nephew said, "Uncle Harlan, I've been looking at this for 2 days, and I am nearly certain they're requesting Rex." I thought about Rex sitting on the floor of Transit Bay 7 at Verath Station, 31 kilograms, old vest, amber eyes on the lead figure, tail making one slow arc. "Well," I said, "his hips are good and his lungs are clear, and the vet signed off on transit last month." "So you'll go?" I looked out the kitchen window. Rex was on the back porch in the afternoon light, doing the ear rotation, watching the tree line. "I'll go," I said. "He'll go, that's what we do." We left in June.